What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So last night we did have new Nintendo and Super Nintendo games announced for Nintendo Switch Online, and you know what? They weren't terrible. We're going to go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Sony's big release for holiday 2022, that being God of War, and it looks like we're starting to get more and more information sort of getting out there that could be pointing towards it, yes, indeed, coming out this year. And we're also going to be talking about the next PlayStation game that appears headed to the PC. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the uploads here on the channel. And we're going to start today with PlayStation VR 2. We know what it looks like, we know some of the features. We're just not really sure exactly when it's coming out or how much it's going to cost, or even the lineup of titles that will be available day one. Well, Sony actually did an entire presentation with investors. They went over a lot of stuff, including some of their plans for this new headset, and we can see this over in that investors briefing. It's like a PDF they released on page 23. They talk all about the PSVR 2 new levels of immersion, but one of the points here is 20 plus major first-party and third-party titles confirmed for PSVR 2 at launch. That's actually quite a bit because there's still a lot of questions around it being backwards compatible with the current PlayStation VR selection. So if it's not for whatever reason, that means they would have a bunch of third-party and first-party games that are, as they say, major, ready to go at launch. That's gonna be the biggest thing here, is building up that game library, because that is what the original or the current PlayStation VR struggled with. It kind of seemed like Sony moved away from investing heavily into the software side of things. But with the newer technology now and the new levels of immersion, as they say, there should be a lot of really cool things they can do with the software. Also, we've talked from time to time about a game called Stray, which is like this adventure puzzle game where you play as a cat. And we've been trying to figure out when it's coming out, as originally it was slated, I thought, to be coming out earlier this year, then it gets pushed a bit further. Now, though, it looks like at least a release date has been spotted, and we can see this over on Twitter from PlayStation Game Size, saying, according to PlayStation database, Stray coming July 19th, 2022, and even has a time, 8 a.m. Pacific. They do mention, it might just be a placeholder, and I mean, if you think about it, we're not too far off from July 19th. You figure they would want at least several months to, I guess, market and talk a bit more about this game, but who knows? Maybe there is like a general or a smaller state of play that Sony could be doing in June, and Stray is part of that with this full release date. I'm not exactly a cat person, but I am interested in this game because it does look pretty unique. I saw people kind of downplaying a bit online because it's like, oh, it's a cat game, but I don't know, it seems like there could be some unique stuff here with this title, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on it, and sure, it'd be great if it came out in July so we could check it out soon. Oh, and it looks like the leaks around which games will be heading into the PlayStation Plus premium service on the retro classic side are just continuing through the ratings board. And like you can see this here from Famitsu, Resistance Retribution, rated for PS5, PS4, in Korea. Of course, this meaning, yeah, Resistance Retribution, which was a PlayStation portable title, would be heading into this service at some point. Sony has mentioned they will be having new game drops basically every month going forward, which means they will leverage all the different libraries as they need to. So seeing PSP games getting rated for the PS4 and the PS5 shouldn't be a surprise. Resistance Retribution, though, is interesting. I mean, I enjoyed it on the PSP, and I believe it even like a full multiplayer. I mostly just did the campaign, and I barely remember it, so it would be cool for it to come to the PlayStation Plus premium service so we can check it out again. I will say, though, I am very curious what these PSP games are going to look like blown up on a big screen. I know the PS1 games at least are getting smoothed out with better resolution and all of this, but PSP games, whew, and the controls and all, it's going to be fun. So we'll see when this game finally gets revealed, I guess going into June, as that is when their service will launch, and who knows, maybe they'll start setting up the summer with some of these releases. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony's big release for 2022, that being God of War Ragnarok. It was apparently supposed to come out last year. I don't think any of us believed it, and when they came out and said, hey guys, we're sorry, we have to delay it, most of us were like, oh, we figured it was coming out next year. But now we're heading towards the end of 2022, and we don't really have much to go on as to if this game is indeed coming out this year or not. They talked to us a bit with Cory Barlog in that kind of strange impromptu looking video on the 4-year anniversary for God of War, that coming out in 2018 on the PlayStation 4. But now we're starting to see some movement here. For example, the game has been rated in the Korean ratings boards. You can see it here. It's God of War Ragnarok. Youth not allowed, by the way, is the decision that they graded. It is an action-adventure game based on Norse mythology, depicting the adventures of Kratos and his son. Sony Interactive Entertainment, an action game, all of this. And they go through some of the reasons as to why it's been rated this way, with excessive profanity, they say drug expression, violence, all these different things, right? That we basically saw in God of War 2018. But on top of that, there is God of War Ragnarok merchandise that's appearing, and it looks like it'll be set up for September. This from the Marmalade, showing off the little Kratos figure, hat, and so on there. And you figure, okay, if we have merchandise hitting sometime in September, we see a rating popping up for the South Korean ratings boards. It appears that Sony is getting this thing set up to be their big holiday release. Now, I don't think it's coming out necessarily in November or even December. So September does kind of make sense. You release the merchandise around the release for the game and all of this. I don't think they'd put it in October because that's when Forspoken's coming out, or at least that's when we think Forspoken's coming out. There have been some, I'll say, rumors going around that Forspoken could actually get delayed again out of this year. And I think it was even mentioned that you could possibly see Final Fantasy 16 slot in there instead, and that would be an absolute shocking thing to happen. So most likely, if anything is going to happen there, Forspoken will just get delayed out of this year. Again, depending on development, but so far the feedback for the game from what we've seen hasn't been great from people online. If that's the case, then yes, you could drop God of War into October, but I still think they're aiming for September, and a lot of that has to do with Sony releasing their titles before that quarter 4 starts up in October, because typically they'll have a lot of third-party games. Think of like Call of Duty coming up, or Call of Duty Warzone 2. Those are big games that Sony makes a ton of money from just for royalties and microtransactions. No real reason for them to take God of War and put it next to or even close proximity of one of those large Call of Duty releases. Also, the more I'm hearing about things related to God of War, I am becoming more and more confident that God of War is coming out this year. And before I was kind of like half and half. I'm like, I think it's going to come out in 2022, but I wouldn't be shocked if all of a sudden they said, hey, it's just taking more time than we thought. We'll see you guys maybe first half of 2023. And hey, we'll line it up in April so it kind of coincides with the 5-year anniversary for God of War 2018. But as of now, I am expecting God of War Ragnarok to come out later on this year. Next up, let's talk about Nintendo Switch Online and a couple of new game additions to the service. A day or so ago, we had seen that there was going to be maintenance for the NES and SNES application, which typically when that happens with the applications for Nintendo Switch Online, it means they are prepping new games to be added, and it looks like this is no different. We can see this tweet from Nintendo of America. 3 classic Super Nintendo and Nintendo titles are now live for Nintendo Switch Online members. I said it wasn't a terrible selection of game, and it's not. We've certainly had worse months than this, but I will say none of these games are massive impact having like headlining titles. For example, the Super Nintendo, Congo's Caper, which I have not played this game at all. You'll have to let me know if you remember this one. I just do not. From looking at the trailer they put out with the gameplay, kind of reminds me of Joe and Mac, I guess, kind of the 2D platforming adventure style game, but there you go. The thing I like about that, though, is it is a game that I'm not familiar with from the Super Nintendo library, so sure, I guess it's new to me then. I'll check it out. Rival Turf, I do remember this one. It's kind of like this beat-em-up style game, and I guess you could kind of relate it to Streets of Rage, sort of. Just maybe not as good, but again, something else thrown in there that I guess would have full multiplayer support too. I'll have to check that one out. I think I had rented that way back in the day when I stayed over at a friend's house. But then we have on the original Nintendo, Pinball. Pinball is a classic, and this is a funny one because I remember with the actual game itself, there were like adapters inside that turned it from a Famicom board into a one for the Nintendo, and I don't know if that had to do with early production. They just had to do that to get them out into the US in time, but I remember going through the different cartridges and seeing if there was an adapter in there. But the game itself, it's pinball, as you would expect, but there were a couple of interesting modes. I remember one, and they did show it off in the trailer, was sort of like this breakout mode where you played as what's supposed to be Mario, but I guess it could have been Jumpman at the time, and you try to knock the ball around to save the girl that's at the top there. So, I don't know, just a different take with some sort of mini games and pinball. But as I said, nothing super impactful. I mean, have pinball in there, that's pretty cool, and a few others to throw in there for variety, but there's no Super Mario RPG. And whenever this happens, and I'm sure it'll continue happening as we go forward, people just ask, where's Super Mario RPG? So I do wonder if Nintendo eventually gets together with Square and they make it happen, they get Super Mario RPG into the service, what's the next game that people are going to always reply to Nintendo? Because, like, we have Earthbound, you would then have Super Mario RPG. I'm not really sure what would be next, but let me know what your guess would be down below. But there we have it. 3 games heading into Nintendo Switch Online, 2 Super Nintendo and 1 Nintendo game. Let me know what you think about them. Next up, let's talk about the next game from PlayStation Studios that appears to be heading to PC. And this was spotted through SteamDB, and a lot of times you'll see entries being added as games are being prepared to release onto Steam. This happened with God of War, and that's how we found out, yeah, that game would be heading to PC at some point in time. And I think it was like a few months later, it popped up. Well, now we can see this, and there were a few different screenshots circulating, but I did go to SteamDB just to double check. It's codenamed on their Oregon right now, and there are user tags at the bottom that includes single player, online co-op, third person shooter, bullet hell, sci-fi exploration, roguelite, female protagonist. Let me know if this rings a bell to you at all. Otherwise, though, you can see Nebelian also went ahead and grabbed some of the shots of it that also appears to point to some references to elements of Returnal. That's right, it does look like Returnal is at least being prepped for release on Steam through SteamDB. So I'm wondering if this is something that will be just popping up on Twitter and then won't make a huge deal about it in a state of play. Although I guess we did talk about Stray getting that release date through PlayStation's database. We're talking about God of War getting merchandise and ratings, and now we are seeing at least a database entry on Steam for Returnal. And they did talk about Uncharted, the Legacy of Thieves collection heading to PC in one of their presentations. So maybe we're starting to see stuff come together for a smaller state of play in June. I'm starting to not necessarily expect a big PlayStation showcase in the near future. I think that could be something that maybe happens towards the end of 2022. But if you see Returnal get announced, Stray, God of War's release date, maybe another third-party game or 2 thrown in there, I think Sony could pull off a state of play like that, and people would be okay overall with it. In June, of course, it'll be alongside of larger showcases from Nintendo and Microsoft, but realistically, it would be better than nothing. Otherwise, we could probably just see a showcase for God of War with the state of play with that release date revealed, and maybe Returnal just gets posted up on Twitter, and that's kind of it. But hey, there we have it. It looks like Returnal is going to be next for PC, and it sounds like Sony is going to be slowing down anytime soon. With those investors in that briefing, they had talked about, hey, in like 4 years, we're looking to have our entire portfolio of releases that will be going up that fiscal year to be half PlayStation and then half mobile and PC. So Sony seems to have found something with the revenue they're generating from the PC side that makes them want to continue, and I guess we'll see Returnal up next. In our last bit of news, let's talk about the Famitsu sales charts. Now, if you remember, last week, there was a really big deal that was made about Xbox outselling PlayStation in Japan. But as I kind of figured, the following week, if there are any PlayStation 5s that go back in stock, it would probably jump back above the Xbox. However, the Xbox actually improved week over week, and we can see the charts here. We're going to start with the games, the top 10. they're all Switch games. Like, that seems to be the norm now, with the Nintendo Switch Sports still at the top, by the way, coming up on 400,000 copies here pretty soon. And then we have Taiko, that being 21,710. Kirby and the Forgotten Land, 12,853. That's coming up on it's coming up with 750,000 units so far. Pretty good for Kirby there. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Then we have eBaseball, Minecraft, Ring Fit Adventure, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Snow Bros. Special is 4,608, and then Mario Party Superstars. Then moving over to the hardware, the Nintendo Switch at the top, 64,839. Keep an eye on the Switch, by the way, over the coming weeks, as it is creeping up on that 25 million unit lifetime sales number in Japan alone. Absolutely ridiculous there. The PlayStation 5, 14,277. You had a pretty big jump from last week. And then we see the Xbox Series behind that, 7,131. So about 900 or so units up from the previous week. And that's the biggest thing here. The Xbox is not going to compare to the PlayStation or obviously the Switch this generation. But if you compare it to the Xbox One, it does appear that the Xbox brand is at least picking up steam in Japan. And then we have the 3DS below that, 256, and then they found 20 PlayStation 4s in the back to sell last week. I also want to point out real quick with the split between the Series X and the Series S. The Series S continues to be the dominant factor between those two systems, being like almost like 90% of the sales coming from that system. So yeah, something to keep an eye on there with that Xbox Series S, obviously catching on in Japan. Over 110,000 systems there now selling for the Xbox Series S, with the other 100,000 being from the Series X. So I'm curious, like I said, how this works out for Xbox this generation, especially if they look more into Japanese developers and publishers, maybe making those day one Game Pass deals there to help push the Xbox further in Japan. Because when I had asked this for people who were living in Japan, a lot of them mentioned, well, I mean, Game Pass is pretty good to pair with that Series S. So that's one of the reasons I'm picking it up. And if Microsoft can get a bit more aggressive adding different games that will be appealing in that region to Game Pass, they might be able to continue selling more and more of these Series S's going forward. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're taking a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, and this was an interesting one. Take a look. Which system from Sony's retro section on PlayStation Plus had the best library of games? 67% said the PlayStation 2. Not surprising to me, because that's what I would have chosen. I mean, the library is just overwhelming for PS2 games, but look at this. The PS3 has 14%. That's over the PlayStation 1. I kind of thought the PlayStation 1 would have been the runner-up here, but not the case. I guess if you look back on the PS1, it was a lot of third-party support for Sony. I mean, they were just getting started out, so they made those kind of deals, and they presented a better medium for cost and what these developers and publishers could do with CDs. But I mean, Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 were all there, so I kind of thought people would have leaned into the PS1 a bit more. But hey, the PS3 had a lot of really good titles. It just took a little longer for the PS3 to get out of the gate compared to the Xbox 360. But when the PS3 finally got moving, it really got moving. And if you look at the sales charts, yeah, the PS3 eventually did pass the Xbox 360. It just was probably around the time when Microsoft stopped caring about selling the Xbox 360. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from JT saying, personally have no interest in 8K gaming. 4K seems to be a real struggle for developers, and it's only going to extend development cycles further. If gaming keeps going this ridiculous digital size queen route, I predict it's going to implode in on itself. I don't really know if there's a need necessarily for 8K. I mean, 4K made sense because if you blow up 1080p to like 65, 70, 75 inch, sure, it does have kind of a blurry look to it, but you throw 4K on there and most of us from like 8, 9 feet away, that's perfectly fine, right? Like I just don't think people are going to see that much of a difference between 8K and 4K, but you'll certainly see the difference between the frame rate of 4K to 8K. As you were saying, there's still an issue when it comes to performance and getting a native 4K experience. So I would much prefer developers and hardware manufacturers to quote unquote conquer 4K completely to where we get 4K 120, no sweat, rather than be like, okay, how do we get 8K 60? It's like, now I think 4K, for me personally, is enough because the law of diminishing returns is certainly starting to kick in above that. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, whether it is the Nintendo Switch Online games that were just added. Let me know what you think about those titles. And then also, what about God of War Ragnarok? Starting to see all this information come out, ratings, and we see the merchandise dropping in September. Do you indeed think this game is coming out this year? Thanks guys for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Newswave.